Well, folks, we have 2 more days until the new plan for Canada is finally revealed. This is one of 2 events that happens throughout the year where we actually get a detailed look into Canada's financial plans, new taxes that might be coming, new benefits that might be coming, as well as where the country is going as a whole. It's one of the biggest events when it comes to Canadian politics and having an idea of what is actually going to happen. And this is going to happen on Thursday at 4 p.m. It is the Fall Economic Update. Chrystia Freeland will be standing in front of the House of Commons and giving her detailed plan, and we'll actually get access to this document here. But in today's video, I want to go over some of the situations and some of the circumstances that are actually very important to understand before we go into this new update, along with some hints and some tips along the lines of what she might actually include in this, as well as some of the criticisms of things that they think will not be included. And it comes at a time when things are not looking so good for Canadians. Take a look at this. This is a new survey that was just released by Nanos, a research institute here in Canada. And we have 2 different indexes here, the Pocketbook Index and the Expectations Index, both of which are on a downward trajectory here. The Pocketbook Index sort of says how Canadians feel about their current economic status and their current standing, starting around 60% earlier, just a couple months ago, and it's steadily declining. We're going to see bigger trends here when we look at the longer term outcomes for these indexes, as well as, again, the Expectations Index, sort of an index that shows how people feel the future will be, the economic future and strength of Canada, along with Canadian real estate prices. Obviously, that has taken quite a tumble here. But when we scroll down a little bit more, we get some context into just how bad things are relative to other times in history. We can see here that the Expectations Index is at an all-time low when you exclude the sort of anomaly times in the past decade here, or past 15 years. We've got the economic crisis here in 2008 and the COVID crisis. And if we eliminate these 2 sort of sections where we are at like the absolute worst financially, well, right now is not looking too good either. And it's actually looking pretty similar to these things that we would have called economic crises. And we also see Stats Canada saying that households have recently faced a perfect storm of economic pressures, which has resulted in the average net worth declining by $65,400 over the past year, down significantly from these times during the COVID pandemic, when we were seeing that people had record high net worth increases as well as record high savings, right? We saw all of this money printed and added into the system, and as a result, a lot of people, oftentimes not people who are the most vulnerable, but middle-class people, well, they were feeling pretty good about their economic standing with larger savings and a larger net worth. And as per usual, we're seeing the net worths of people who are less wealthy be more dramatically affected than those who are more wealthy. Here we're seeing a 12% decline for the least wealthy Canadians, and only a 5.9% decline in net worth for the wealthiest Canadians. So we see that wealth gap is getting larger after a time when it was not really expanding all that much throughout the pandemic. So we have this perfect storm of economic pressures that are leading to all Canadians feeling a lot less wealthy these days, right before this big economic update, which we're going to get into in a second. But we've also seen that it's the least wealthy that are being affected the most, and this is leading to a dramatic increase in the amount of people who are needing to rely on food banks. And here in this clip that I'm about to show you, someone was questioned as to what can the government actually do to help change this reality, and they're saying that the government might be focusing on the entirely wrong place.
So it's really about building our social safety net that we've neglected for decades. So talking about a minimum income floor. We don't talk enough about single adults. Single adults, those living alone, don't have a second income to buffer their, a job loss or low wages, represent almost half of the people who rely on food banks, and yet they're completely neglected by government policy. We tend to focus on people like seniors, on children, but not single adults. We need some policy focus there.
So she mentions that there's a huge gap in our social safety net and says, hey, maybe we need more programs and more supports for Canadians. Of course, some people will say that any more supports would cause more inflation to happen here in Canada, so people are being very careful around that. We talked a lot about that in the IMF warning video that is on the channel just a couple videos back. But she does mention here, we're focusing so much on seniors and so much on children, but there's this sort of group of sort of middle-aged adults who don't have these dependencies, who are just completely forgotten from the policy. And she says, hey, if we're heading into a recession, things could get even worse. And it's looking more and more likely that we are, especially if the Bank of Canada tightens their monetary policy too much. We'll talk on the channel a lot about how when the Bank of Canada is raising interest rates like it is right now, well, that has a negative effect on the economy. What they're trying to do is to try to bring down demand in the economy so that people won't buy as many things and inflation will slow down. But at the very same time, that can lead to more job losses, and that's one of the main concerns here heading forward, especially given that the EI program has not been overhauled yet. This was one of the main campaign promises from the Liberal government, and something that Carla Qualtrough, the Minister for Disability and Inclusion, as well as the employment insurance side of things, well, she was tasked with sort of revamping this entire EI system, and it's been promised in budgets and economic updates. We might see some information about that in the new economic update that's coming up, but we don't know for sure. And in fact, this is actually something that has been pushed even harder by the Bloc Québécois in the House of Commons as of late. Let me show you this clip where Carla Qualtrough is kind of called out for not doing anything to improve this program.
If there is a recession, we could end up in the exact same situation, and that would be embarrassing because you could see it coming this time. Will EI reform be added to the economic update? The Honourable Minister.
That employment insurance has not kept up with the way Canadians work, and that's why access and adequacy are key fundamental principles that we're building into a modernized approach to employment insurance. I look forward to revealing the government's plan to modernize the steps we will take to make sure every worker continues to have access, fair access across the country, no matter where they live.
So the Bloc Québécois MP is saying, well, hey, you've been promising this EI reform for a long time. Is it going to be in this Thursday's fall economic update? To that, Carla Qualtrough says, well, we're looking forward to revealing what we've been doing on this. Doesn't really confirm if it's going to be inside of this economic update or not. So that's one thing we're going to be looking for on Thursday, when of course we're going to be live streaming it here on the channel when this economic update gets released, so we can get all the details here together. So interesting that we may not actually receive information on this updated EI, allowing many more people to fall through the cracks, especially as gig work is more popular here in Canada. And this isn't some concern that's just echoed by the members of the opposition here in Canada. We also have the chief economic officer for the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, saying, hey, job losses in Canada might happen, especially as the Bank of Canada is continuing to raise interest rates.
We're going to see some unemployment increase in coming years, including in Canada. We see that in the US as well. Now, this is starting from a fairly low level. The thing I want to point out here is labor markets are quite tight. They are very strong in many advanced economies, including Canada. Financial conditions is something to watch out for. Of course, it can erupt in many corners of the world. We've seen volatility in the last few weeks in the UK and elsewhere. And so that's something that could happen.
So he says he thinks that there will be more job losses over the next year as we enter this recession, which seems completely imminent at this point, especially given the fact that the Bank of Canada's outlook is saying that there's going to be zero or negative growth for the next 3 quarters, which is the definition of a recession. So a lot looms here on the way that the Bank of Canada handles this, and whether or not they stop their interest rate increases soon enough to counteract these potential job losses that could come. Now, he also brings up the fact here that we're starting from a relatively tight labor market as it stands right now, meaning there are lots of people who are looking for workers and people are having a hard time hiring people. Now, there's something to be said here about the difference between the types of jobs that people want versus the types of jobs that are available, and whether or not these numbers and this data actually incorporates those statistics and what amount of people are disenfranchised and are actually leaving the labor force because it no longer makes sense to work for such a low wage when prices are so high because of inflation, right? So there's a little bit of a mismatch here. So that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at and looking for data on going forward. But now we got to talk about Chrystia Freeland and the finance minister. Well, she is the finance minister, and this update that she's going to be giving on Thursday. Now, I need to provide a little bit of context here because in a media scrum just a few days ago, Chrystia Freeland talked about some hints as to what's going to be inside of this economic update and how they might be spending their money or not spending their money.
Let me just repeat my answer in English. So, I really believe that we are in a very challenging time economically in Canada and also in the world. And all you have to do is look across the Atlantic to see how important in challenging moments like today, institutional stability is for a country. Canada is the country of peace, order, and good government. That is very, very valuable. and it is more valuable today than ever. From my perspective, institutional stability very much includes the independence of the Bank of Canada. Our government respects very much the independence of the Bank of Canada, and that is our position today, and it will be our position going forward. Now, when it comes to the very real economic challenges Canadians are facing today, we get that. Inflation is too high. Life is really tough for a lot of people. And rising interest rates are posing another set of challenges. People are worried about their mortgages. Our response to that is twofold. The first is to provide targeted, fiscally responsible support to the Canadians who need it the most. Now, we're doing that with the GST credit that has now received royal assent. Canadians will be getting that support soon. That is important. I am never going to claim that that will totally compensate people for the challenges they're facing, but for the people who need it the most, that is real support. And we're working hard to get the support, the $500 for people who are renting and need support. We're working hard on dental care. At the same time, we really believe it's important to have a fiscally responsible approach right now. We really understand the value of not pouring fuel on the flames of inflation and of not making the Bank of Canada's very tough job even harder.
So first she talks about the importance of the independence of the Bank of Canada and that they're able to continue to raise these rates to fight inflation because, as the Bank of Canada has said, if the rates aren't raising right now and inflation continues, then they might even have to raise rates even more quickly or more dramatically in the future. So Freeland's saying we appreciate the independence of the Bank of Canada and we're just going to let them do their thing, especially after the IMF has warned Canada now that they shouldn't be too aggressive with their spending to counteract these interest rate increases. So as a result, Chrystia Freeland here is saying that there's going to be targeted spending in the upcoming update, but there's likely not going to be a whole lot of new spending added in here because if they were to spend too much, that wouldn't be, in her words, fiscally responsible and it would counteract the job that the Bank of Canada is doing. So we've seen the increase to the GST, the doubling of the GST, as well as the housing benefit, as well as dental care, which has now passed through the House of Commons and just needs to go through the Senate before it is confirmed. So those things are coming, but we could also see additional programs added. But again, these programs would need to be very targeted. Now, whether they'd be targeted again to single individuals, like the food bank sort of story there was pointing to, or whether it would be continued support for children, seniors, or what exactly this is going to be, that's all going to be revealed as of Thursday this week. However, there is pressure for her to do something to help the situation, and it's not just only from the Conservatives or the NDP. We're also seeing pressure from south of the border, well, especially in comparison to what they're doing. You might have heard of the American Inflation Reduction Act, and a lot of people are looking to Chrystia Freeland and the Liberal government to do something similar here to help with the entire situation. So here are some of the things that have raised money for the American government as a result of this act, some of the things that the Liberal government might consider here in Canada, and some of the things that they're going to be doing with that extra money raised. So they're putting some caps on prescription drug prices, stopping price gouging there. We've heard talk about grocery stores here in Canada and how there could be more things imposed there to make sure that they're not profiting off of the rising prices and using CPI or inflation as a reason to keep prices high, as well as an increase of the corporate minimum tax rate, 15%, which they say will raise in America $222 billion, increase tax enforcement, hiring more people to go after tax fraud. They expect $181 billion to come from that, a 1% excise tax on stock buybacks, essentially corporations who have a lot of profit and they want to buy back their stock to make it more valuable for their shareholders. $74 billion is expected to be raised through that, as well as an extension of the limitation on excess business losses of $53 billion. So these are the ways that they're raising money, but they're planning on spending this money in some unique ways, addressing domestic energy security and funding for drought resiliency in Western states, so sort of stockpiling energy, as well as deficit reduction reduction. They're actually going to take $238 billion that is raised through this bill. This is their plan, and actually just pay down the deficit, pay down the government debt. Something that could be a prudent decision, especially as interest rates are so high. The Canadian government right now has a whole lot of debt, and a lot of that debt is going to be rolling over in the next couple of years, and we'll need to refinance that debt, or essentially sell more Government of Canada bonds. However, with bond prices the way they are, those interest rates could be higher, meaning that the average amount that our tax dollars goes to paying for programs versus how much it goes to service the debt or just make the interest rate payments, well, that could be a challenging situation going forward. So we might look to Chrystia Freeland to see if she's going to do some of the similar things that they're doing in the States with this Inflation Reduction Act, but it's likely that this act or this fall economic update that we're going to see on Thursday at 4 p.m., well, it's likely that that's probably going to be a little bit underwhelming because she, again, says we're going to only have very, very targeted spending here. But of course, we're going to be finding out about that all together right here on the channel. You can check the link in the description because there's likely going to be a video sort of already scheduled that you can click the notification bell for so you're notified when I go live on Thursday. And we're going to listen to Chrystia Freeland's speech, and we're going to listen to see, are there going to be new programs? Are there going to be new taxes? How are they going to raise money? How are they going to handle this difficult situation that we're in now as Canadians? So make sure to tune in for that. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, check out the links in the description. You can get $50, up to $50 when you fund those accounts to either invest in cryptocurrency or in stocks with Wealthsimple. And of course, you can check out the link in the description to the Canada Money Mastery Program, where I talk a lot more about finance and how you can get your own finances in order so that you can invest more and set yourself up for a more wealthy future. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.